All right, now we're back with the second video in the playlist where we continue into part 4, or section 4 of the table of contents of data publication 1. So if you missed the first part, check out the playlist, go back to the other video, but right now we're going to dive into literate programming. And I have downloaded the Quarto file just by clicking on the link on this page that's in the description of the video, and I've fired up my RStudio, which is this dark background screen. So when you see the dark background, I'm in my RStudio. I think I will zoom in just a little bit so that it's quite clear on any screen. And so I'll be toggling back and forth between the white background web page and the dark background RStudio environment to run my code. So here I have the Quarto file. The Quarto file has the text that you see on the web page in a sort of light HTML format of Markdown, and it has our code that is set off in these what we call code chunks that start with a backwards tick, 3 tick marks, and end in 3 tick marks. You'll see them sort of grayed out in this environment, and we can run those using the play button over on the right of that code chunk section. So I'm going to also, there's an outline that follows the contents as I've laid them out, so I'm going to just click on literate programming to jump to that section. And now we're set up, we're ready to run some code when we're going to get to that in a second. But let me now, having talked about the technicalities, let me talk about the concept of literate programming. So this is the lingo that is used for code that basically has good comments. Sometimes we write a quick and dirty code file that just has the commands that we want to run. Sometimes we put just a few sections. We might label each section of code just for our own reference or navigating around the code file. But if we think about it from a new user perspective, someone coming to that code for the first time and seeing the text in front of them, well-commented code really comes from that perspective, where the comments tell us what the function of the code is and illustrate any ambiguities. There's a book that explains this concept, literate programming. You can read the Wikipedia on it and get more background. But this is something that can happen in any computing environment, because always there's typically a way to insert comments into the code. But other environments make this easier, like Jupyter Notebook for Python, where we have a way of writing text, embedding code in the text, and have them be side by side in a seamless format. Mathematica does the same thing, and in R, which is where I am focused, we use RStudio to enter this information, and we can process it in a certain way that generates a result. And for example, the commands in this file, let me just go back to the setup, where we have code chunks that are set off and visible and can be hidden or displayed, or run those results and insert results, is part of this literate programming environment. So, yeah, in general, I'm going to work through these bullets in 4.1. We can embed our code in the text we want to display. Our code will run as the document is generated. This is a big plus from a reproducibility point of view, which is that every time we generate the document, we are able to ensure that it's really using the data, the latest version of the data, and those data analysis commands and steps are being run, and they can run error-free and give you a fresh result, as opposed to an approach where you copy and paste, you run the analysis separately and you copy and paste things into a document. If you were to forget, oh, I made a change in the data, I updated the data, I need to update the graphs, and you update 2 out of 3 graphs, but you forget to do the third. And then the third graph is inaccurate because it's not based on the current data. If we never let that happen, that is a good thing from a reproducibility, reliability point of view. In R, we have this lingo of once we put information in that format, the code is tangled with the text, mixed in with the text. When we generate the document, we describe it as being woven or knitted. And you'll see this package knitr occurs. knitr is one of the essential packages in generating these documents. And then we can extract the code if we need to. Once we have the documents in this format, we can easily generate output, identical, accurate output in multiple formats. And in this Quarto environment, you'll see this render button, right? And so the render, I can render into HTML, PDF, Word, and that's how all of these formats are available on these pages, is because that's the approach that I was using. From an accessibility point of view, this is also good that we let the user use the format that they like the best. And there are also, I have never come to R from a professional coder's background. My approach is more like, if I can do it, you can do it, because I learned it on the fly as someone with a general social science background. But so I don't focus on the details of cleaning up your code, but there are tools like Format R that will do things like clean your code to have consistent spacing and indentations, so that it all looks neat and clean, and there's no ambiguity from that perspective. And we'll basically clean the code to best practices. So that's another thing to think about. All right, so that's the concept in general, and now I want to talk about the three major ways to do this in R. So 4.2, LaTeX and Sweave or Sweave, I'm never sure how to pronounce that. This is the original traditional way and is the most heavy-duty way, I would say. If you are preparing a dissertation or a complex article, and you need the power of LaTeX, right? So LaTeX does basically any kind of scientific, mathematical type setting that you need. It can manage complex bibliographies and references. It can format a document in many different ways with a bit of elbow grease and applying different codes and styles. You'll also often see LaTeX style files provided by journals so that you can apply the style and meet the journal's requirements. So if this is the approach that you use or need that power, you can write a LaTeX file and insert chunks of R code or other code chunks inside those documents that will then run and generate tables and figures to insert into the LaTeX document. And the package that you use for that is Sweave or Sweave, right? So these, this example requires you to have some LaTeX knowledge. So I don't want to get into that because that's a little more complex, but I want to let everyone know that this is available, and you can see, for example, in this the guide that I've pulled up, the embedded code is pretty simple, right? We just say begin and label the chunk, and then there's some input and output. The input are the lines of R code, and then it will generate output on that basis, and then we end the chunk, right? So everything from begin S chunk to end S chunk here is one of those pieces of code, and then the rest is written in LaTeX. So if I may sound like I'm describing it as being difficult, but if you work with LaTeX, you're already accustomed to that kind of style, and this works very seamlessly with LaTeX. Now, if you're just working within RStudio, there is a built-in system that allows you to do all of the major things in the same way, but just not as many formatting options as LaTeX, not quite as powerful as LaTeX, but much simpler to learn for the first time. And that is knitr and markdown, or R markdown. So Markdown is a very simplified markup language like HTML, but it has relatively few formatting codes, but that cover most of the basics. So you can quickly write things, quickly generate things, and quickly, with the knitr package, add your R code. So it's popular lightweight replacement. The R Markdown format is basically Markdown, but with a little bit more math functionality, so you can do more with your R code. Is easy to work with in RStudio, and you could publish the documents quickly at the RPubs site. So once you are in RStudio, you can click a button and send the results to the RPubs website, and it will post them there right away. When we need more complex formatting, we can fall back on LaTeX and Sweave. I want to show you an example of this, and there is a built-in example in RStudio where we simply go to New File, and we can say we'd like to create a new R Markdown file. And I'll give it a title. I'm filming this on a Thursday, so I'll say Thursday Demo, and it'll ask a few questions. Default output format, those don't really matter because we can switch those later. And this is just to show you what this is like when you're creating the document. So it's given us a sample, a very small file. And whenever I want to produce a document from this, I click the knit button. And first time I do this, it's going to ask me where do I want to save the file. So that's what popped up there. Now it runs the code, and it's given me this is a local HTML file that has popped up. And if I click publish right there, I can send it to our pubs. This content can also be sent to a server that is managed by your institution or organization via Posit Connect. That's a tool that Posit, the company behind our studio, makes available. You can host it yourself since it's simply HTML. And there is now this Posit Connect Cloud, which has free but also paid upgrades. I don't want to go down the road of describing all that because that stuff changes fairly rapidly. But just know that this is a simple output, and it's easy to work with and easy to share once you have it. And again, we can knit to other formats quite easily. So if I have a PDF generation environment on my computer, which you probably already do if you're running Linux, and is relatively easy to install if you're working on Mac, and a little bit more work if you're working on Linux, Windows. You can generate a PDF, and as you see, it's the same content but just formatted like a document, and you can save it and take it away. Now to edit this, it's also very simple. We have a kind of a title block that allows us to specify some of those major things. So title and stuff can be changed. When I knit the document once more, it will now reflect those changes. It's got my full name there. There's typically a setup. I would not mess with the setup chunk. That's usually not necessary. But the chunks of code, as we saw, are embedded here in these. When the document is formatted this way, it doesn't require the 3 ticks. But so we simply ask to insert a code chunk with this insert chunk option in the menu, code insert chunk, and the chunk, let me go ahead and do that. We'll start with R in curly brackets. That's letting the system know what's coming in this chunk is R code. And I should give it also a summary label, and that has to be unique. So cars, for example, is already being used right here. I can't use that, but I can say whatever I want. I'll say something else, and I'll say print cars. Right, cars is a built-in data set in R that is a listing of some older car models and some statistics about them. And once I've done that, I'm going to put a little bit more text. That was the raw data. Here's a summary, right? So anything that's not in the little grayed out code chunk boxes is text. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to knit it so we can see that change has happened. And you can see when I print is a simple command, right? It just prints out the full data. Actually, up to a certain line limit. If it's too big, it'll cut off. But essentially, that's what I've done. And you can see the text that I edited, the command that I used to create the summary of the data, and a plot of the data. not too much more to say about this except that if we want to test our code before we just knit the whole thing, we can use this play button to run a chunk and see what comes back as a result. If we want to alter what's being displayed, and what I mean by that is, let me knit to PDF, that in this example we are showing the code, the command that was run, and the results, which is probably good from a reproducibility, literate programming point of view, but sometimes we want to have a polished report where we're kind of hiding the commands that are run, and so you can select these options to show output only, to run the code silently and not show any output, or have some code that does not actually run because you're just talking about it, and it's maybe optional. You don't want to run it every time you generate the document. So those are all options. We can control their behavior, but those are things we can do. You notice that the setting that changed here is that it now says echo false, and I'll just prove to you that it no longer shows the print cars command. It just jumps right into printing out the data. And the markdown itself, right? So markdown has some very simple commands. If we look at the source here, the source is the raw text version. So in raw text, you can simply put brackets around something to turn it into a link. You put double asterisks on something to make it bold. And in RStudio, you have a choice of just typing the raw text or using a visual editor, which you would use like you would use Microsoft Word, and just highlight something and click on the bold or click on the italics to make those changes. Plot commands, same way. Just a plot will appear in the output. And so you can see that this covers a lot of the bases. It's pretty easy to work with, and it lets you take our code and put it in a document, which is what this literate programming segment is all about. So I think that's enough of demoing that. There are links here to more about R Markdown, so you can learn all the ins and outs. There are links to the documentation for knitr itself, should you need to consult that, although I have to say I have never felt a need to delve into the bowels of knitr. What I have found useful since it became popular in recent years is Quarto. So Quarto is also a POSIT-sponsored project that works well with R, but also Python and other coding languages. And it can do everything that knitr and R Markdown do without even making any changes, right? So if you have an R Markdown file, which typically ends .rmd, and you rename it to a Quarto file, which is .qmd, and run it, it runs just fine, right? So let me do that. I'm just going to copy and paste the code of can I do, yeah, let me do a select all and copy and do a new file, Quarto document. There's the demo. In this case, it only starts out with a small title chunk, but I'm going to just paste in everything from the previous file. Right, this is identical to the R Markdown file that we just had, and I can click render, and render works just the same as knitting does. Let me save it. It always wants me to save the files first. Before it will render. So now I can render, and here comes the Quarto version of the same material. So you may also notice it's got a little subtler formatting, which is it highlights the code chunks in a bit more polished fashion. The author and published dates are a little dressed up a bit. So even this looks slightly better. But what I would say about Quarto, first of all, it's a painless switch from knitr or Markdown, because the basics are all the same, but you will also gain the ability to format a lot of those higher level things that LaTeX and Sweave can do. And you can see that from the Quarto file that I've pulled up, I haven't really worked with it too much in this video chunk, but you can see from the syntax that it, I'm not using any fancy features here that are not Markdown style. But if you were to go to the Quarto webpage and start to look around at their materials, you will see that it can do a lot more. And I believe Quarto will probably have videos on how great all that is. I'm not going to get into it in this video, other than what I've copied on the web page are the bullets from the Quarto site itself. Use even more kinds of code, even more output formats such as EPUB are available, more LaTeX equations and functions, cross references, more page layout, more flexibility, the ability to create interactive, dynamic visualization tools embedded in an online document, structured material into a website or a book in a detailed way, all wrapped up in Quarto. So I think it is an important tool for more complex work. I've also given you a link to the reference guide where you can see all the types of things that you can work into using Quarto. All right, so I've actually done this a little out of sequence. The web page says that I'll now start to walk through the editing output, but I've already done that. So I will close this segment, and the next video will pick up with the package management part of the video.